Which we'll be talking in just a few minutes. Yes, there is a coincidence that our last names match. At least they have for the last 28 years. So we're excited to be here, and we're going to go ahead and get started. So, what are we talking about? We live in an interesting time, don't we? A couple of things that I thought were very interesting as we were preparing this is we started looking at the different way that the world is compared to the way it was when I started in this business several years ago, more years ago than I really want to admit to. A couple of did you knows. Did you ever think you'd be living in a time when more people would buy an iPhone in the first weekend of its introduction than would vote in a presidential primary? Think about that for a minute. I was talking at a conference one time, and another person had a good did you know, or interesting times. Did you ever think you'd live in a time where American astronauts would have to ride a Soviet rocket to get into space? It's kind of a different world we're living in. And the premise behind our presentation is, as you seek to lead your organizations and be members of community, are you going to react to these interesting times, or are you going to respond? Business for a while, you might remember some of these decades. In the 1970s, growth in a region was all governed by industrial parks. Everybody was building industrial parks. The idea was, if you build it, they will come. In the 80s, industry wasn't really the buzzword anymore. It was more, we were becoming more of a service enterprise economy, and so we started looking more at office parks. And then in the 1990s, with the boom of the internet, everybody talked about the information age was going to be the future and the way to go. In the 2000s, you might have heard some things about quality of place, best places to live, the best places to do business, best places to raise a family, best economy or best economic environment to attract business. In the 2010s and beyond, it has been predicted that what we're really in now is a talent race. And that sounds a little counterintuitive when you consider the economy. The United States, with all of the major metropolitan and metropolitan statistical areas, this end of the continuum is 2004. So make it jump around here. And it's going to show you job loss with red dots and job gain with green dots over the last 8 years. It's kind of an interesting dialogue and an interesting graphic for you to see. You can see a couple of things happening throughout the United States. Here we are coming into 2005, and the economy looks very robust. People are competing for talent. We come through mid-2005 into 2006. That big red splotch is New Orleans and the hurricanes and disaster down there. And as you look at jobs, net gains and losses by metropolitan statistical area, you start to see some problems up in the Northeast auto industry around 2007. 2008 is coming in. You might remember something called the stimulus package. It's going to hit pretty soon. Here we are beginning in 2008, going into 2009. Now we are full-blown into an economic recession. Coming into 2010, we start to see the math start to come back down to what might be considered a more normal look. You see early 2010, not much of anything going on in the country. Now we're in 2011. We start to see some normalcy, not quite the green growth we were seeing in the early 2000s. And now we're coming to 2012, and we're beginning to see what some people are calling a recovery. But in comparison to what it has looked like in the past, it is a smaller recovery, not a robust recovery. And that's where we are now with the most recent data. With all of those jobs going, why is employee engagement important? I mean, there ought to be a glut of employees out there. When all that red was going on, employees were looking too difficult. There's some interesting statistics, though, that kind of tell us differently. Employees now more than ever, because of that economic challenge, are feeling disengaged in the workplace. Lost productivity due to disengaged employees cost the U.S. economy over $370 billion last year. Engaged employees that want to be engaged with their employer, advocate on behalf of their employer 67% of the time versus only 3% of those that are not consider themselves to be not engaged in the workplace. And 75% of leaders of organizations that have been polled say that while they believe, 90% believe that it is important, the 75% say they have no plan, although they know it impacts their organization. And this is the key for that big red map that we saw, that despite the recession, more employees today are looking for opportunities outside of their current workplace than prior to 2008. Less than half of U.S. workers are satisfied with their jobs, the lowest percentage in this country since 1987. And disengaged employees, those that classified themselves as not being engaged in the workplace, their turnover was 51% higher than those of engaged employees. And 72% of current U.S. workers say they are not engaged in their work. Those are wonderful statistics, but what does that really mean? It really has a nuts and bolts impact and a fiscal impact on your organization. And we're going to talk about what that impact is and what some models are that you can use to increase employee engagement in the workplace. This question is, do you feel employee engagement is important in your workplace? Again, you will text, the number would be 22333, and then you would text the word code and either 179409 for yes or 179410 for no. We're going to look and see how your attitudes about employee engagement mirror that of the surveys that we've been referencing. So it doesn't take much to see that pretty quickly you all exceed the national average in the way that you view employee engagement. As a matter of fact, we're trending very high this comparison to the national average. Planning school like me. If you take the average employee salary of your organization and you multiply it times your turnover rate, you can figure out very quickly how much having a high turnover rate costs your organization on an annual or semi-annual basis. And it equates to very real dollars. And when you look at the statistics we talked about earlier, that turnover rates of engaged employees are significantly lower, absenteeism rates are significantly lower, health claims on engaged employees are significantly lower. This can be a very real cost multiplier in your organization. And something that is interesting that although people recognize that it's something that's very important, very few people are taking steps to address it. And that's why these proactive strategies are very important. I'm about to ask Dr. Reed to come up and talk to you about a model that she's developed and she's worked through kind of now that I've set the stage. But I'm going to leave you with this quote that I found in a book that I was reading called The Energy Bus. I'm a pretty prolific reader of business fables. I really enjoy learning lessons through story. I'm going to ask you to think about this quote. The closer you get to truth, the simpler and more powerful the lessons become. The model that you're going to see is very easily dismissed because it is very simple. However, engaging the model and engaging your employees through that model can have substantial results. And so I would ask you to not be taken off guard by how simple this model can be to do, because it reaches employees at a very basic level. It reaches them at a level that makes them feel very much engaged in the work that they do, and therefore they become a cheerleader or an advocate for your organization at a level that